All right, now there are some questions about this subject of mind. And I think the best way to simplify it is this. As you know, we use terms like divine mind and human mind and mortal mind. And you have to think there that there are three minds. Or some students believe that divine mind is God, but that the human mind or the mortal mind or the carnal mind are all the same. They're just your mind. And now let us have this completely straightened out so that we make no mistakes. There is only one mind. The mind imbued with truth, and that means your mind or my mind. Mind, your mind or mine, when it is imbued with truth, is the only divine mind there is. It's the only spiritual mind there is. It's the only spiritual source there is of mind. Mind imbued with truth is an illumined mind. A mind in ignorance of spiritual subjects is the unillumined mind. Of course, that has nothing to do with education or those subjects, intellectuality. We use the word unillumined only in the sense of unillumined as to spiritual things and spiritual values. Now, the average human being has a mind made up almost entirely of beliefs, theories, superstitions, fears, and whatever known facts there are in this world. And that mind in that state cannot apprehend spiritual values. The things of God are foolishness to that mind. The carnal mind is enmity against God. The mind, our mind, as it is before our spiritual estate, is a purely functioning, reasoning, thinking activity. In some cases, that mind is imbued with an intuitive faculty. But this too may be entirely on the human level. That you see in the experiments at Duke University, where this mind gets to where it can 8 times out of 10 tell you what numbers are going to come up on the dice or what cards are going to come up. Nothing spiritual about that. Yet it is intuitive. Those who can read the signs of the skies and know the weather have intuition, but that is not spiritual. That also is human. Now, this human mind, yours and mine, which is made up of both good and evil, is in many cases, as you know, heavily tilted on the side of good. And as you also know, there are many cases when that same human mind is weighted down on the side of evil. And one sure thing we all know that it contains more ignorance than it contains wisdom. Now, something at some time or other opens in us a desire for truth. Sometimes it isn't really a desire for truth, it's just as a desire for improved conditions, and we have heard that truth is one way to get it. But let us put it this way, that in some way or other, our path is led to a truth teaching. If we are led in the right direction, and perhaps everyone is ultimately, even though they take a lot of bypass to get there, they will be led to some teaching that is imbued with the truth of a real spiritual nature. If that is the case, that teaching will begin to spiritualize the thought, the mind, the consciousness of that individual. And there will be a gradual change from the material sense of existence which we have lived, and maybe are living at that time, to a somewhat greater spiritual life. In other words, some measure of the spiritual verities enters our experience, and now we begin to spend some time with the spiritual saints, the spiritual seers, the spiritual masters, the spiritual teachers on earth, the spiritual companions. We begin to move more and more with each other, less and less with the people of this world, who live entirely flesh and blood existence. Remember, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of truth. Every word that comes out of the mouth of God does not mean that we stop eating bread and other foods. It merely means that the eating of foods is an incident to our experience, but the eating of spiritual meat, spiritual bread, the Word of God, the drinking of spiritual wine and waters, drinking of inspiration, that becomes a major part of our experience, and in time the most important one. And now it may be said of us that our mind is to some extent spiritually illumined. Now then, a mind permeated with truth, a mind that spends a lot of time in the Bible, in the true spiritual writings, with sincere spiritual students, teachers, that mind becomes more and more illumined, and it partakes less and less of its carnal nature. It indulges less and less of its carnal fears, appetites, worries, and problems. Now, all of this time, remember, it is your mind and my mind, which was just the average, everyday human mind, full of good and evil on the human level, which now through being permeated with truth, saturated with truth, becomes more and more illumined, and in that degree becomes more and more divine, or let us say partakes more and more of the divine nature. Now, at no time does it become the creative principle of life. At no time does it become God, because even at its very, very highest, it is an effect. And when it's thoroughly illumined, it is a product of God, because the other has been dropped away. It is very much like our example, or the example, of the pail of water, which is half dirty, and then by adding more clean water and more clean water and more clean water, the dirt lessens and lessens until there is no dirt left. So it is that the human mind, which originally was spiritual and partook of the nature of God, but through human experience has now become a human mind made up of good and of evil, as it becomes more and more saturated with truth, indoctrined with truth, filled with truth, as we learn to tabernacle more and more with truth and with the spiritually illumined people of the world, we partake more and more of the divine nature. Our mind becomes more and more spiritual, and then when it is well spiritualized, you can say of it that it is a soul faculty, a spiritually illumined mind, receptive and responsive to God and the things of God. It's still an effect, it's still an avenue of awareness, but now instead of being only aware of human things, now it is also aware of spiritual things. As a matter of fact, the more spiritually illumined the mind becomes, the more acute it becomes in worldly matters. In other words, a spiritually illumined mind must be a better painter or sculptor or artist or teacher or geographer or scientist or mathematician. You have seen that in the experience of men like Einstein as they evolved through the mechanics of mathematics to the point where he writes that there must come a place, a jumping off place from mathematics into the intuitive. And so you find with men like Sir James Jeans and others of their kind that when they rise to the higher estate, they realize that the human mind is limited until it becomes touched by spiritual awareness, spiritual consciousness. Then it not only takes in the things of God, but it becomes finer and better in the human conduct of life. Now, you must, through experience, find this, that there are men and women today, women who are housekeepers, housewives, bookkeepers, stenographers, without a thought that they might be anything more than that, through their study of truth, have become most wonderful healers, practitioners, teachers of truth. And yet they're the same person they always were, only now their mind has taken on the illumination of spiritual values. The same with men who have been businessmen, professional men, and of course I know that many of you know that among the Christian Science practitioners and teachers and lecturers, there are literally dozens who have come out of the materia medica world. So that there is no limitation. Once your mind is open to spiritual values and you have that illumined human mind, then you are partaking to such a degree of the divine that you are alert and you are receptive and responsive to spiritual value. Now, it is in this that you can turn within and say to yourself, Father, lead me to my teacher or to my teaching. And literally tens of thousands of people in this very generation have been led to teachers, some close to them and some far away, who have been able to lead them out of the mesmerism of human living into a higher sense of spiritual life, and yet visible on earth as a higher state of human existence. Always, where there is spiritual illumination, it tends to make the human life on a higher plane. So that, in the beginning, you are not concerned with divine mind. You are not concerned with the actual contacting of God. What you are concerned with in the beginning is developing an illumined human mind. That means filling it with spiritual truth by reading, by hearing, by practicing what you have. The most important part of it all is the practicing. No matter how much hearing you do, and no matter how much reading you do, if you do not put into practice what you gain through your reading and your hearing, you aren't going to be very much more spiritual 20 more years from now than you are today, because it is not the reading or the hearing that spiritualizes, but what use you make of it within yourself. Now, there is an exception to all this. There are some who receive spiritual light without any of these processes. It is by a divine grace. Those of you who have read Cosmic Consciousness by Dr. Buck know that in all of those cases, none of those people were responsible for their illumination. It came to them, as it were, out of the clear sky. But note this, that in about 80% of those cases, the illumination did nothing for the people who had it. It was just one experience that was never repeated, and they were more or less miserable the rest of their lives because they never could bring it back again. Only in about 20%, probably less than that, was it a repeated experience, and in only very few cases was it a continuous experience. There are different reasons for that too. Sometimes when a person has received that first illumination through grace without anything of their own, they too often sat around waiting for it to happen again and made no investigation of how or what they might do that might lead them in that direction as a way of life. Some of them merely accepted it as an unusual miracle and thought nothing more of it. Others thought of it as a miracle they'd like to have happen again but didn't know how and did nothing about it. Many people believe that if you receive illumination, that in some way or other you never go backward and you never lose it, and that is far from true. In the spiritual life, it is just as true as in the sport life. It's much easier to become a champion than it is to stay one. And so it is in this. It is much easier to attain illumination than it is to keep it. The keeping of it is far more difficult than the original attaining of it. And the reason? Well, there are a million reasons. Yes, I guess there are a million reasons. When that spirit touches one, it brings about a change in one's life. And some people aren't ready for that change. They are not ready to give up whatever it is that must be given up in order for them to be able to proceed with that life. Other people are not prepared to take the sacrifices or sometimes the martyrdom that comes with the spiritual life. Many people are not yet ready to be different than their neighbors. Some people are not ready to break the law. And of course, as you know, one of the greatest things that happens in this work is how many times you're called on to break the law. Just read the New Testament and see how many times the disciples and the apostles went out breaking the law. That's why they were imprisoned, that's why they were tortured, that's why they were crucified, and all down through the ages somebody was breaking the law. All of the men that were imprisoned in the Vatican, who saw some of them their death there, were breaking the law of revealing truth, and found their punishments for it. All from the 12th to the 17th century, the people who lived the spiritual life in Europe, all the way from Switzerland to England, were persecuted practically into their graves. They were always breaking the law because it was against the law to be spiritual. It was against the law to meet and discuss these things. As you probably know, one of the greatest of all of them, Jacques Bain, was excommunicated from his own city because he had spiritual revelations. And that's against the law at that particular time. So it is that the price of illumination and the price of living the spiritual life is a costly one, and all are not prepared to pay it. Almost everybody is willing to receive the blessings and the healings that come with spiritual life, but not to embark on the missions that are sometimes given them. And there are other reasons. Sometimes when the spiritual light comes, it so changes your mode of life that you find yourself lost to your old modes of income and supply. And you may have to go through protracted periods of poverty. And unless you can face that with the fact, well, what difference does it make whether I'm rich or poor, whether I eat a big meal or just get along with some bread? I'm on the spiritual path, and that's enough. If you can't take that, that is one thing that will, and has thrown many people off this path. They cannot take the change in their circumstances that may deprive them for a while of their income. There are other people who prosper very quickly as the spiritual life touches them, and they can't take prosperity. They begin the indulgence of the nice things of human life on such a scale that their attention is on that rather than on abiding in the Spirit. And there's so many others. There's the matter of families, there's the matter of friendships. If you can go back to the days of Walt Whitman and remember how he was hounded, even his friend Emerson had to deny him because he was so indiscreet as to write about a prostitute in his book, which of course was not a nice thing to do in those days, and insulted even good Mr. Emerson. Now, when one begins to feel a spiritual impulse, when one begins to realize that something different is happening within them, it calls for periods of abstaining from the human ways of life. It calls for longer periods of silence, of meditation, of aloneness. It calls for breaking off those bridge parties and other things of like nature, which in them and of themselves are harmless, but are an absolute interference to one on the spiritual path. And one must be very careful as this spiritual light comes that they encourage it rather than discourage it. And the only way that you can encourage it is to find the literature that is suitable to your state of consciousness, to find the periods for meditation and contemplation. Eventually, when the Spirit starts to reveal itself to you, then of course there comes these longer periods when you have to live absolutely in and of that Spirit for those things. And that, you can see, readily interferes with the normal routine of life. No, it isn't easy to hold the spiritual light. It is difficult. Now, those who receive it through grace, without having done any human thing to attain it, without even knowing that there was such a thing, without any expectancy of such a thing, as a rule are meant to do something with it. Along with the experience comes a mission, and that mission must be performed. In the Reader's Digest this month, you'll read the story of this Englishwoman who was a servant in a household in England and who had this terrific urge to go to China and do missionary work. Now, that could not have come to her as vanity, as you will see as you read her experiences. It came as an inner urge, and although at the time it came, she counted her funds to see how close she could get to China and found that she had less than a 5-cent piece. But believe it or not, she got to China. And the way she got there is fascinating reading. And she remained in China for many, many, many years. The work she did there was marvelous according to her light. But you'll see as you read it that no man and no woman could have performed it. Absolutely none. Had there not been the Spirit of God there to carry her through, it could never have been done. But what that woman went through to maintain that Spirit of God and retain it, the trial she accepted, makes really exciting reading. Now, others, like our metaphysical students, as a rule, go no further than receiving enough light to give them help with their human living. But you must realize this, that even if you go no further than that, you are on the path. And that as you reach the next stage of your unfoldment, after what the world calls death, you will have been prepared for another and a higher experience than if you had never studied spiritual wisdom. In other words, our todays determine our tomorrows. What we are today determines what we will be tomorrow. What we are studying today, what we are accomplishing today, can only be preparation for tomorrow, because if there is a God, and who doubts there is, what we are doing here and now can certainly not be for our own personal selfish interest or merely for today. What we are doing, what we are spending in the way of time, effort, money, consecration, devotion, must be preparing us for something greater, and something not merely to make you or me healthy or wealthy. God cannot work that way. I know God cannot work to make you healthy or wealthy just for that reason. God's work in us is always for a universal good. And so it is that every ounce of spiritual wisdom that we attain on this plane, even if it is only a grain, is a preparation for 2 grains or 22 in our next experience. I'm assured of that, as I'm assured of the fact that there are those who come to this plane of life having been prepared in previous existence for their spiritual or intellectual developments today. I am one of those who do not believe that you could make a good spiritual light in the period between the cradle and the grave. Nor do I believe that you could really make a good teacher of any subject, a good educator of any subject, or a good doctor of any subject in one generation, in one period of cradle to the grave. I am sure that if anyone has a gift in these lines, it is not a gift that began with their birth date. Oh, I know there are a lot of shoemakers that are in the spiritual lines, in the medical lines, in the scholastic lines. I'm not talking of those. They could be made in one generation. But they are being fitted for something better in the next. I do say this, that everyone who has skill, talent, art, proficiency, ability, in any given line, has not been able to acquire it just between the cradle and the grave. And I know that whatever talents are laid up within us now, whatever it is that we are storehouses for, in whatever line, is a fitting preparation for something higher. Now you must watch this and understand this. The world has been getting progressively better ever since the time of recorded history. You can't imagine that when you read the headlines in the paper, but if you see behind the surface of humanity, you will see a far higher type of human, of citizen, than was true 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, except in the case of those illumined ones. Always, those who have gone on with illumination are helping our progress on this path, as much as we are helping each other. And as we pass from this scene, wouldn't it be a waste of talent if we just wasted away in a grave or hanging in space? Oh, you know that God could not be preparing us for a cemetery. God could not be preparing us for extinction or for a life that did not include the utilizing of the spiritual gifts that we today are acquiring at great trouble, great expense, great effort, great devotion. It is for a purpose. And it isn't for the purpose of you or me, it is for the purpose of what we can contribute to the whole of consciousness. Now, from my own experience, I say to you, do not be concerned about spiritual experiences or psychic experiences. Do not be concerned whether or not you are having the experiences you'd like to have or think that others are having. Do not be concerned with whether or not you see lights or auras or hear the still small voice. That really is not your concern. Your concern is what you do day by day in the way of opening your consciousness to a higher development. Your concern must be more reading, more studying, more hearing the Word, more mingling with those on the spiritual path, and above all things, more practice of even the little that you know. None of us knows too much, remember. We all have 1 or 2 grains, not much more, because the spiritual wisdom of the universe has not imparted itself to us as fully as it should, or rather as we would like it to be and feel it should. And so we're dealing only with very, very small bits of spiritual wisdom. But we can't increase it by hoping for it, desiring it, or praying for it. We can only increase it by practicing whatever we know now. every healing for which we are responsible lifts us higher in the ability to meet the next problem that comes along. The person who goes through their life meeting 1 or 2 or 3 cases a day can never hope to believe that they are gaining the consciousness of the person after they're meeting 20 and 30 and 40, and so on and so on. Because every problem that comes to us is a stepping stone. Sometimes it comes in the form of our own problems. And if not, it comes in the form of the problems of our patients and our students. But if we take them faithfully, if we treat each one as it comes to us as something that we are responsible for, having accepted it, let us give it the best we've got until we either meet it or definitely know that we haven't and can't. But at least give our very best to it. We are then increasing our own ability for the next experiences that come. And as I say to you, it isn't for any personal glory, nor is it for any personal profit, because the further you go in this work, the more you'll find that the most you can get out of this life is some food and clothing and a place to live. Your activities, your work, keeps you too fully occupied to have anything else out of life that the world calls living in this world. And so it isn't for personal glory, and it isn't for personal profit. It isn't for anything personal. It is only that we can better fulfill this mission, which ultimately, and believe this or not, the mystics of the world ultimately will reveal the secret of harmonious living. It isn't going to come from bigger and better bombs. It isn't going to come from more labor-saving devices. Those things just give us more time to get into trouble as a rule. But the more our consciousness expands along spiritual lines, the more we are living the life of God fulfilling itself, and then in that degree we are lifting the entire consciousness of the world. If I be lifted up, shall draw all men unto me. Now, we, in our work, have brought to your attention the fact that for the balance of this year, please give as much time and attention to the letters as you can. Those who are not familiar with the letters would certainly do well to go back to the 1954, 1955, 1956 letters, all of which are in bound form, and see how this whole idea has been carried out. Remember that the message itself is in the writings, and that the the letters have been our working tools. The letters have been the explanations of different points of the writings. The letters contain the teacher to student relationship and consciousness, helping us to work on specific problems, on specific ideas, and specific unfoldments. Now, these 3 books, The Art of Meditation, Practicing the Presence, and Living the Infinite Way, are the 3 inspirational books which not only contain the principle of our work, but more especially designed to lead us to spiritual realization. The classes from which these books were taken were all classes, tapes of the nature of meditation, communion, contemplation. And they were assembled and they form these books. So that both for the principle and for the inspiration, and more especially for the inspiration and the guidance into meditation, these are the 3 books. The other books are our textbooks on the principles. Now, as you know, the question comes up continually as to introducing this subject to those that are not on the path. Most of you already know that we do not advertise and that we do not proselyte. But certainly we have the right, where it will be welcomed, to offer a cup of cold water, and for that purpose now the book The Art of Meditation has seemed to be the best of the introductory books. It seems to meet the need even of those who have no metaphysical, no spiritual background. And so I bring that to your attention for that purpose. And next in order in that line is practicing the presence and the living the infinite way. The others only come into the picture when one has something of a background, so that the subject matter of metaphysics and the spiritual life will not shock. I don't know what else I can bring to your attention at this moment, and so I'm going to ask for a brief recess. Will you cut the question? Came very, very quickly. The question was this: in going into meditation, what is my attitude as I sit here? What am I supposed to do or think or... Well, attitude was the word that kept repeating itself. What is my attitude? And I want to bring this to your attention so that you can bring this to your own attention each time that you meditate until you are thoroughly grounded in it. Now watch this. When you close your eyes to meditate, remember, you are not going to use meditation as a power. You're not using it for healing purposes or enriching purposes or getting something, nor are you going to use it to invoke a deific power. You are going to meditate for the purpose of being receptive, of hearing if there is anything to hear, or seeing if there is anything to see. You are not here to create any condition, or to change any, or improve any, or heal any. Even though somebody may have asked you for help, and you've gone into meditation to give them help, remember, you are not going to give them help. On the human level of life, there are two powers, good and evil. And you ordinarily try to use a good power to overcome an evil power. We are not going to do that in our meditation. We are not in the realm of mind. We're not using meditation for the purpose of changing conditions. The purpose of meditation is hearing the still small voice, receptivity to truth. We're using no power except the power of being attentive to whatever may come to us within. In meditation, we are beholders. We behold anything that God may bring to our attention. listening. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. If you have any difficulty in being still, just remember a few passages. Mind imbued with truth is the Christ, is the spiritual presence. Thy grace is my sufficiency. In quietness and confidence, my strength. The Lord is my shepherd. Peace. My peace give I unto thee. My peace, spiritual peace. A peace that passeth understanding. Now, it is the ability to attain that state of peace without trying to use your mind as a power, without trying to use your thoughts as a power, without trying to influence either God or man, without trying to put thoughts into God, and certainly without trying to put thoughts into man. Just being still, receptive, and letting that peace descend upon you. That's the attitude. And it's always right in that meditation to reassure yourself so as to keep thought quiet and peaceful, serene, until that inner serenity comes, that awareness, that click. And then do not stay too long in meditation. Rather have more periods of meditation in a day and make them of shorter duration until such time as the Spirit itself lengthens them for you, because it should not be too long until you do not meditate anymore, until the meditation takes place in you and you are but the instrument in which it is going on. You merely sit and the Spirit does the meditating within you. That is the ultimate of meditation. I'm going back for a moment to the question on healing as it relates to either individual or collective healing, multiple, and tell you of an instance where a different result may take place, and that is wherever two or more are gathered together. For instance, as we meet here tonight and every night during our classwork, we are not concerned with the specific healing of any individual, but it is natural that almost every one of you has in your mind some condition or other that you would like translated into the spiritual sense instead of the material, and which really means that you'd like healing. And if it isn't some condition of your own being or body, it may be of some member of your family or patient or student at home. Now, it is very possible, and as a matter of fact, I don't think we can miss out on this one, that through our 2 hours together here in the evening of the unfoldment of truth and our meditations, there must be more than one healing take place on every occasion in this room, and in some cases back in your hometown. There is no reason why everyone couldn't be healed of everything that bothers them. It just isn't usual for it to happen. But in all of this experience we have seen that there are always one healing or 2 or 3 reported at every time that we come together, whether it's in a lecture or whether it's in a class. And I have been present where in one evening 12 healings were reported before the meeting broke up, and nearly 20 the next morning. That was an actual experience in Seattle, Washington. And we have had experiences where many, many, many healings have been reported in the class. Now, that was not through specific healing work in the sense that the practitioner or teacher knew that someone was touching their consciousness for healing. It had to do with the fact, watch this, it had to do with the fact that as I sit here, I have but one purpose, and that is the realization of the presence of God. Now, wouldn't it be fantastic to believe that the presence of God could be experienced in this room and not touch someone or other, or 2 someones or 12 someones who were receptive and responsive? So as we come to classwork and as we come to lecture work, if we will remember that we're not going there for a person or a practitioner or a teacher, we're going there for the experience of God's presence. It's an utter impossibility to go out without some measure of healing or regeneration in one or another department of life. It is an impossibility for us to be in this work day after day, day after day, ourselves, even though we never give, or rarely ever, give specific thought to ourselves. It is an impossibility to be in it and contact the presence of God and not have it do something for us all the time. And it does. So in that case, there is a difference where 2 or more are gathered together for the purpose of realizing God. All those who are receptive and responsive at that moment should likewise feel it and experience healing in some form. Thank you for tonight. Thank you.